Thanks, Edward. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to have this opportunity to talk through some of the experience that I'm bringing to this, and I hope people will find it a useful introduction to where we have come from and are going to. Just a little bit of introduction to me, I suppose. I've worked for about 10 years in a previous life at BASAC, which is a network of community centres around the country. Previously, I worked at a community centre as one of them, Mansfield House in Barking. I'm sorry, in Plaistow, and now, of course, BASAC has merged with the Development Trust Association to form Locality, more of which later. I got myself an MA last year in community organising at Queen Mary, first cohort of such folk, and that was fascinating because it was run in conjunction with London Citizens, and as a result, during that, I took up a placement in South London with London Citizens for about 5 months or so, getting a real experience of doing some organising in the field. And now, since October, I've been working as a trainee community organiser with Locality, placed in the London Borough of Southwark with Cambridge House, and enjoying the opportunity to actually practice some of the stuff that I've been studying for the last year. An overview then of what we're going to do during our time together today. Firstly, I'd like to offer an introduction to community organising, a little bit of the theory, the background, and so forth. There's an opportunity to ask some questions. Then I'd like to talk about how organising has developed, from where it's come, and some of the recent developments in the States. And then finally to talk a little bit about the current situation in the UK, outlining also how this was all it has been tied up with the development of London Citizens and indeed Citizens UK work in Britain. So to make a start, community organising. Many people were in fact involved in the development of organising in the States. Folks like sites like Hahn and Harry Boyd, both of whom I recommend reading their books as well. But Saul Alinsky was the son of immigrant Jewish community members in Chicago, born in 1909. And he's often regarded as the principal originator of what we now know as community organising. Saul was a bit of a maverick character, very competitive and very sharp. Did quite a bit of work in his early days with gang culture in Chicago's downtown areas, but later began to develop a whole range of processes which led to what we now know as community organising. His approach, when he died from a heart attack in '92, was taken forward by his then deputy, Ed Chambers, and the Industrial Areas Foundation, a body which Saul himself founded in 1940. And the IAF has remained a central part of organising across the States. Their approach, the IAF's approach to organising, was transposed to the UK by Neil Jameson, and that's through a number of different routes, including Telco and London Citizens, has now become Citizens UK. Locality has come at this from a different tack, looking for an indigenous approach, one that's new and fresh. But more on that later in the presentation. So Citizens UK has delivered a number of significant organising successes over the 20 years of its existence. Most famously, the Living Wage campaign, which puts pressure on employers to consider the reality of living in, particularly in London, trying to bring up a family of mum and dad and 2 kids, how much money it takes to be able to afford to live reasonably. And that living wage has been calculated now by academics and adopted by Boris Johnson and by Ken Livingstone in his predecessor, and adopted indeed by a number of major banks, a number of universities, and the campaign continues to put pressure on the NHS and on others to begin to pay their workers, particularly those at the bottom of the scale, sufficient that they should be able to live a reasonable life in London. Strangers into Citizens was identified by the network of Citizens UK as a primary matter of campaign in the late 90s and early 2000s. They were coming across a large number of undocumented residents who had lived in this limbo world for sometimes for decades. And Strangers into Citizens was a call on the government to take action that got these people out of a place that where their permanent status was undecided. Move them into a place where they could begin to gain access to the resources for which they were often paying through tax and national insurance and so forth, but were not able to access them themselves in person. And then a third success, I think, could be chalked down to Citizens UK, is City Safe, which creates havens in the community for young people who feel themselves under threat of street violence. There are a number of instances in South London particularly where young people have found themselves feeling threatened on buses or in the street itself, and been able to run for cover, if you like, to places which have been have trained volunteers, have agreements with the police that the police will respond swiftly, and are able to provide a place of safety for young people who would otherwise potentially find themselves at the rough end of street life. So I'd like to try to summarize what I understand organising to be. Of course, any summary always butchers the truth, so I'm not going to claim this to be authoritative, but it may well help people to get a glimpse into what I'm suggesting organising, the fundamentals of organising are. After these 4 points, I've explained the 4 slides, I think now. There will be an opportunity to come back at me fairly quickly about where you need clarification and what hasn't been clear for you. So let's move on and have a look at what the principal parts of organising are. So I'm suggesting that relationships form the absolutely central plank of organising. And by relationships I don't mean a nodding acquaintance, but relationships of trust and respect. These are, if you like, relationships which occur in the public arena, in the public realm, and are not merely private conversations between individuals. Relationships of this sort are fundamental to building a network of citizens who can take power for themselves. It involves face-to-face exchange, of course, between two people, and it's often in the privacy of a home, or certainly the confidentiality of a personal conversation, which is focused on developing a meaningful relationship. Here we're not talking about just getting to know people, but actually beginning to talk about the things that really matter to us and understand each other at a deeper level. So it's an opportunity to share values and motivations, to look to what we would really like to see happen, but also to be able to explore some of the things about which we moan too often, and indeed what we might do together to make a difference. So it's about hearing somebody's willingness to act, and act together with others. There's this sense that so many people experience, certainly in disadvantaged communities, that they can't really act of their own volition. That there's very little you can do about the wider things that impact on your life, and that really all you'd have to do is hunker down and accept it. Well, this begins to explore the question of what it is that we might do together that could change that, that could begin to hand back a sense of volition and a positive sense of action to individuals and to groups. Through this relationship building, people begin to be able to be challenged to move forward, to think about their own skills, knowledge and experience, and to think how they really want to see the world change. Such conversations face into both indifference and difference, and so take seriously the fact that we are an immensely diverse sort of community. It's kept personal and at a human scale. So we're talking about relationships which are face-to-face, one-to-one. They're about the relationship that you form and you alone can form. And many of these relationships last then for decades because they're founded on a format of listening and a format of conversation that has developed a real sense of mutual respect and understanding. So we have a whole set of relationships in the community, a whole network of people who know each other in this sort of way and who trust and respect each other. Inside that network, there is an opportunity through the work of conversation and debate, through the discussions and exchange, for issues that really energize community members to come to the fore. This can, of course, be things that the statutory agencies and local authorities and otherwise are doing or asking for questions for or so forth, but very often, these are issues that have never really surfaced before. We ask open questions. We encourage and support inquiry. We look all the time to go beneath the surface and ask for root causes. Why is it that that's the case? What is it that could be done to change that situation? People come together then around things which form the common good. And I'll use that term again and again, by which I'm meaning those things which are felt priorities for the community and where we together can act. There may be communities that have really strong views on a whole range of issues, but we need to find those issues where there is a shared perspective and where we can act together freely and with full energy. Clearly we all know that people move into action when they get angry. Anger is often pushed inside, anger is often suppressed. But when we touch into anger and we help people recognize what their anger is about, then it's possible for them perhaps to organize and to see their future changing. The organizer's role is, of course, to keep them together and keep them focused, but the anger is often that which drives forward action. This autonomous debate is really important in leading to a set of shared goals and an agreement on strategy. Organizations that are independent of everyone else come together around these causes and seek to take action to change the fundamental root causes. People come together around the things that really matter to them and are keen to act because these are things which make a real difference to their day-to-day lives. Now, organising is often and rightly connected to debates about power. And most people recognise that there's power working in their lives, but we take power a stage or two further in organising. We talk about power as the capacity to get things done, and that's a whole range of different people and at different levels. Individuals, of course, have power in their own capacity to get things done, but very often experience that power has been leached away from them, and that despite their wish to be able to be powerful in their own lives, they often feel pretty powerless. There's acknowledgement, I think, in organising that power is central to all human affairs, that we can't really walk away from the reality that unless you have the capacity to get things done, you're not able to play a full and active part in the development of the community, and even more so of your own life and your family's life. So the essence at the central place in organising is a power analysis of the everyday life of the community. A sense of asking, well, who is it and what is it that controls our lives, and how can we understand that power in a deeper and more fundamental way? It focuses on the way in which power is used for and used against citizens more generally, and that leads to a sense, together with a set of concerns, it leads to what are known as issues. Issues and concerns become a real central part of organising, and as a result, it's possible to determine who to target, who can make a decision and change the life for many people. The reality is that organising will often take individuals or small groups and make them the central plank of their organising, because they want those few people to determine the future of a large number of people. It's essentially calling those folk back to the common good, suggesting that their current stance, their current way of acting in the community is not fulfilling the full potential of the common good for all people in the community. It's become partial, it's become limited, it's become specific. It calls therefore on power holders to be accountable to the community and takes action to enforce that accountability. So the last of my 4 points. Alinsky said, or suggested, that there were 2 forms of power. There's money power and people power. The distinction is, for me, a really important one. Money power tends to centralize, and it tends to be it tends to work against the people's interests. People power tends to be about the mass. It tends to be about numbers. It tends to be about the large group determining their own future and taking their action forward by using their numerical strength. Bringing out lots of organized people at strategic moments leads to opportunities for the powerful first to acknowledge the importance of this group, often first by opposing it, by challenging it, by questioning it, and secondly to beginning to come to a point where that group is respected because it's organized, because it's disciplined, and because it has real leadership that is authentically rooted in the community. Numbers really matter in organizing, and an independent body of people taking action together leads to a real sense of confidence and a new sense of power for those people. It's really important that this sense of an organized and independent voice based on ships fundamentally related to an independent agenda, drawing on their own power of numbers, can truly hold a power holders to account. It leads to a new form of democracy, if you like. Here's the opportunity that I mentioned earlier. I'd be very happy to answer any questions that you might have, things that you aren't clear about or that you want to challenge in what I've said. I'll go on in a minute or two to talk about where organising comes from, and indeed about the current Locality training programme. But let's hear a little bit about what you think. Do you have any questions about what you've heard so far? I will leave it in Tim's good hands to suggest any questions that might have come in already.
Hello everyone. So if you put your hand up and then I will unmute you and you can ask a question to Mark. There's nobody at the moment. So I think I might kick off just quickly. I was wondering, Mark, if you could speak a little bit about the similarities and differences between community organising and community development.
Sure. Thank you, Tim. It's one of those issues that regularly raises its ugly head in these contexts. Community development is a well-developed corpus of work, theory, and since I've been working for a community development agency for the last 10 years, one that I respect very highly. Community development has had a rich and deep history of impact on disadvantaged communities in the UK, and has taken a role in community life, which is really very central to the way in which much community engagement and community participation takes place. In the United States, that's generally not been the case, or it's shaped itself in a different way. Community development has tended to be identified there with large institutions, often housing institutions, that were established in the 1960s and 70s in many cases, and began to be have been very important service providers in the States, leading to a huge growth in very effective and well thought through delivery mechanisms. The contrast with community organising in the States has been this level of independence. What many organisers recognise is that services are really very important. Many poorer households are very dependent on those services, and if they're taken away or they're threatened in one way or another, often community organisers will be working with their community to help to protect those services. But the reality is that they're very seldom involved directly in service delivery. And of course in the UK context, that relates back to the way in which much community development in the last 20 years certainly has been very programme delivery focused. It's been about delivering a particular agenda. So organisations that are engaged in community development normally have a particular funding stream. They often have a limited time frame. They're often engaged to deliver their community development for a particular purpose, and so their questions and the issues that they work with the community on are about community safety, about health, about children's services, and these are all very useful processes. But they are in my mind, very clearly not community organising. Community organising is accountable downwards, and it undertakes its agenda and its work on the basis of what the community has determined itself. It's not part of a wider programme of delivery around regeneration perhaps, or around the reconfiguration of local health services. It's very clearly about developing and devising what the community sees as the priorities, and building from that a changed and transformed relationship between the community and the powers that be. The community development normally acknowledges a partnership approach to relationships with the state, whereas often community organising comes at the state from a more conflictual position. So I think there are some fundamental differences, of course, because both are working in the community and because both are about human frailty and human cooperation. There's a great deal of common. There are a great deal of common skills, knowledge, and often the work at first glance will look similar. But the underlying ethic, the institutional realities, and the way in which it's funded and developed, for me, are fundamentally different community development to community organising. I hope that helps.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. I've had another couple of questions in. The first one is from Andy McGregor. He asks, is there a potential tension with the elected representatives in a community when people are paid to work as community organisers when town and parish councillors are unpaid?
Thank you, Andy. I think there is. But I think that the tension is one that's a very real and it's a true one, if you like. It's a true tension. So much of our local politics has been based around party politics and around party allegiance. And what community organising offers is an opportunity for a truly grassroots approach to politics. It reshapes the relationship between politics and people on the ground. There's a real sense in which this relationship building and the establishment of fundamentally human contact between neighbours and between residents undergirds a very different style of politics and relating. The tension with councillors and with others who have an elected mandate is very real, but there has always been tension, has there not, between participative and elective democracy, and it seems to me that this is a real sense in which presenting something in this participative form of democracy really asks questions of how legitimate local elected members are and how their relationships with their residents, their constituents are developed. So yes, I do think there's an issue there, but I want to try to hold some of those sort of questions for later in the presentation, if I may, as this is really just sort of talking about the bare bones of what organising is, rather than quite where we've come to and how we might go forward in the future.
That's great. Another question's come in from Sam Axtell. He says, in your response to Tim, I didn't hear you mention values. Community development is based on a clear set of values. Does community organising have a clear value base in the same way? And just in response to that, Penny Walker has asked Sam, what are the values of community development? So Sam, if you want to have a quick think about that, maybe jot something down to me, or if you're willing to speak, then we can get a bit of a conversation going there. But over to you, Mark.
Thanks. Yes, I mean, I think the value base of community development has been very well developed, and it's very clear from a number of key documents in the community development portfolio what those values are. Strong amongst them are equality and social justice, and there's no doubt that those are shared by community organising. I think in a value sense there would be a great deal of overlap. Much of the same attitudes and approaches are taken by community organisers as are taken by community development workers. I think it's more that the difference lies in the analysis of society. My sense is that community organising understands society to be fundamentally bifurcated. To put that in simple language, essentially it says that we have two camps in society. The powerful and the powerless, and that their interests are not served by the same means. Community development, on the other hand, tends to talk in terms of a partnership between agencies, a partnership between the people and the state, being a way of reconciling opposites and differences, and in the end that everyone will benefit from us working more closely together. This essential difference, I think, is pretty fundamental and has to be a deeper understanding. There has to be a deeper understanding of those that analysis of society to help us go forward. So yes, Sam, I agree with you that there is a very well developed value base for community development. Community organising similarly has a very strongly developed value base, and much of it is shared. As we'll see later on, one of the fundamentals of community organising is not to do for others what they can do for themselves, so there's a strong sense of enabling and facilitating resourcing the community in such a way that people develop their own skills, their own abilities, their own power. and that's, of course, shared in many ways, in many cases, by community development as well.
So Sam has replied to Penny, and I've just posted his reply in the chat section. I don't think there are any other questions at the moment, so shall we move on with the presentation?
Very happy to. Shall we move on? I'd just quite like to talk a little bit about where organising came from, or comes from. I'm not quite sure which. The origins of organising lie perhaps in Chicago in the 1940s. We have to remember the Great Depression and the hideous experience of many immigrants coming to the States from across Europe. Many lived in the most appallingly impoverished circumstances, and Chicago was a very diverse and divided community. In the back of the yards, which, by the way, is a neighborhood in Chicago, it's the back of the old meat packing yards. In the back of the yards, Alinsky was fundamental in starting a process which turned the community around. He brought together a range of different players, from the Catholic Church to Marxist union organisers. He brought together different communities that were at war with each other in the local area, and he formed the back of the yards, a body for the back of the yards, which united those interests and set them over and against the interests that were bringing that slum into poverty and oppression. It was an amazing turnaround for the area, and over only 20 or 30 years, Back of the Yards became a very well-developed and quite influential example of what organising could do. It remained a working-class community, but was very clearly orientated towards developing its own identity, and people became proud of living at the Back of the Yards. Alinsky's work went on to work. He went on to work in Chicago's Black Ghetto of Woodlawns. That's an instance I know particularly well, where a whole raft of new techniques were used to put pressure on a whole range of players. It started with a march down the main shopping centre, down the main shopping street, against the way in which outside commercial interests were exploiting the local black community. Paying a short change, giving short weight, and on the forecourt of the Catholic Church was set up a set of scales, and people could bring their goods and have them weighed in public, and the short weight goods were then publicly shown to be short, and the community took action then against the individual businesses that continued to offer short weights. Similarly, of course, they did the same with short change. Alinsky in Woodlawns also was the first to introduce rent strikes, where people in the most appalling conditions, in housing that was deteriorating extremely badly, were able to put their money aside into a separate account, the money that was going to be rent, until the landlord actually did the properties up. And they managed not only to persuade landlords by that means, but also when they were particularly incalcitrant, they sent their blackest members of the community out to the white residential areas where the landlords lived, and they picketed their homes and handed out leaflets to their neighbours telling them about the slum landlord who lived next to them. This, surprisingly enough, did quite a lot of good for the campaign, and lots of landlords began to do up their properties and improve them. He also went on later to work at New York's Rochester, in an area called Rochester, where the Kodak Film Company was failing to employ black workers. And this, of course, during the 1960s, when the rise of the civil rights movement was having a major impact. Later in organising life, when Alinsky had passed on, it moved into rural organising, creating some amazing organisations both in California and down south. And today, organising has many different traditions. Many of them are church-based because the churches have been fundamental funders and organisers of these working-class communities, and some of the networks, of the traditions, work with individuals. In other traditions, such as that of the Industrial Areas Foundation, they work with institutions first. So the members of the organisation are the institution rather than the individual members, individual people. So PICO and Gamaliel and DART are some of the other networks than the IAF. The roots of organising go a long way back, and they draw on a whole range of sources of inspiration. Just to quickly whisk you through a history, which was half a course on my MA. Aristotle, of course, talked about human beings being fundamentally political, that there's no way we can be part of the polis or the human town or gathering place without expressing our full humanity. Machiavelli looked at the work of the powerful and how you could work with power in such a way as to achieve your goals. He has a bad reputation, but much of what he said about power still holds today. The Chicago School of Urban Sociology, of which Alinsky was a student for a while, first pioneered an ethnographic approach to sociology, where individual students were encouraged to go out onto the streets and into the byways and the alleys, to sit alongside their subjects of study, and to be a part of the community of which they were in which they were interested. And this sense of immersion was brought home by the Chicago School from an ethnography which was essentially foreign and essentially rather exotic. They brought it home and they made it real in the US setting. Catholic social teaching over probably a century now has emphasized some very fundamental issues which have been central to the development of community organizing. Solidarity, for example, corporatism, subsidiarity. These are terms which have real resonance for the Catholic community, and they have continued to be really fundamental to the way in which organizing thinks about and works with its theory and its practice. Paulo Freire continues to be an influence on organising in a whole range of ways. A Brazilian educator who was fundamentally talking about the way in which the consciousness of the poor could be enabled and facilitated through exploring themes and ideas that were of their daily life. And through those explorations, coming to a place where they were able to understand the way in which they were held in oppression, where they were subsumed, and that conscientization became part of a whole range of movements across the world who hold Freire in high regard. Clearly, also, organising was influenced by the civil rights movement of the 1960s, and subsequently the opposition to the Vietnamese War. Also, there are other routes to organising which are independent of Alinsky, not least the Highlander Institute in the south, and other training for folk who are coming out of slavery, providing them with many of the basics to understand their situation. And to be able to build their own self-worth and confidence, and begin to take action on things that really mattered to them. In the UK, the history is somewhat more recent. London Citizens founded its founding chapter was the East London Community Organisation, or TELCO, as it's known to its friends, in 1996. Neil Jameson was one of the key organisers for TELCO, and essentially it took institutions into membership, like churches and unions and universities and schools, and bound them together through causing them to engage in this development of key relationships, key public realm relationships, where people began to trust and know and understand each other at a more fundamental level, not just within the institutions but between the institutions. So people who had never spoken and whose ideological positions were completely opposed within TELCO could begin to talk to each other in a much more coherent way. So mosques were drawn into into TELCO from the very outset, and as we know, the Muslim community in East London is very strong. And their conversations with their neighbouring churches, with their neighbouring unions, universities and schools allowed the conversations to be to open up a public space where collaboration between now over 200 member organisations in London Citizens, between those many different organisations could begin to occur. London Citizens brought together all the mayoral candidates for London in 2008. They held a public assembly where they were able to raise their agenda, their 4 or 5 issues with the candidates, and to ask them whether they were willing to fulfill on particular pledges in public. In a similar way, in May 2010, Citizens UK, that's the alliance of chapters across the UK, brought together over 2,000 people at Westminster Central Hall, and invited the 3 main party leaders to each talk to citizens about the agenda that they had for the next 4 or 5 years. The power of organising has come to the fore in the last 2 or 3 years, and it's that has had a real influence on the way in which the government and others have seen organising. Of course, we can't forget the influence of Barack Obama. In 2007, he was nominated for the Democratic Party's nomination for the presidency, and throughout his campaign, 2007 and 8, he was incredibly successful at mobilizing a huge number of ordinary Americans, people who had nothing to do in previous elections with politics. He used many organizing techniques to mobilize volunteers, a huge number of donors. Many millions of dollars were given in very small pockets, very small amounts, to his campaign, and his staff became really adept at organising because they themselves were organised. The Republicans towards the end of the campaign became very irritated by this because the success of the grassroots approach that Obama had taken was beginning to tell, and they began sniping, and that led to a greater visibility for community organising than it had had for probably 2 or 3 decades. So in 2009, Barack Obama became the first black US president, and of course our colleagues in the UK were looking on with intense interest at what was happening across the pond, very interested to see what might be possible here, and trying to see how they might use the same instruments themselves. In the Labour movement, Maurice Glassman was probably the key player in launching what he called Blue Labour in April 2009. It was in some ways a response to Philip Blond's Red Tory, Philip at Res Publica had been talking for some couple of years about a renewed way of looking at the Tory tradition from a more compassionate and responsive position. It was, in a sense, Morris came to Blue Labour from a really positive experience of London Citizens. He'd been deeply involved in Citizens UK for a number of years, and his connections through a number of key players close to the party leadership campaign led to him being very influential on Ed and David Miliband's campaigns for the leadership. In practice, David Miliband founded the Movement for Change, which continues, but by an announcement of the results of the election, they had recruited 1,000 organisers across the Labour movement, 1,000 individuals who were prepared and willing to learn how to organise in such a way as to renew the unions and local branch using community organising. With Ed Miliband's appointment as party leader, this faced a little bit of a challenge, yet actually Ed has embraced Maurice Glassman, indeed made him Lord, and has seemed to engage with a Blue Labour agenda quite significantly. He's also supported the involvement of community organising across the Labour Party, and that continues. I recommend Tangled Up in Blue by Rowena Davis, a recent publication which looks at this history in some detail. Similarly, the Tories on the other side were seeking in their manifesto to appoint 5,000 organisers trained to work in areas of, quotes, low social capital. I'm not quite sure how that was to be judged, but the Tory manifesto made this commitment, and so when the coalition came to power in May 2010, the Office for Civil Society were tasked with creating a tender, and that proposal suggested that there would be 500 senior organisers recruited over 4 years, each with a bursary of £20,000 or so, which would pay for all their learning for the year of their training. So their training would last a year, and they'd come in batches through the 4 years. They in turn would be responsible for recruiting and training a further 4,500 volunteer organisers. This approach from the Conservative Party and subsequently from the coalition was inspired, yes, to some extent by the Red Tories and the Conservative tradition of community action. Those of you who know Tocqueville will know that his visit to America caused him to be very impressed by the way in which the community was able to organise itself, was able to develop its own organisations and its own action in such a way that that the community's needs were met. Others have suggested that that this was also a move from central office to try to promote culture change in local government. But I think the jury is out on that one. I'm not clear whether that was the case or not. So the tender was out in October 2011. Bids had to be in by December. And a new organisation formed from my previous employer, BASAC, and the Development Trust Association called Locality won the contract. They won the contract in February 2011 for putting it into practice from April 2011. It focuses on organising using a new UK model of organising developed by the Regenerate Trust. Essentially what this focuses on is listening in the community and stimulating action for change through the development of community projects. So it seeks to develop a range of different projects which in turn create a a democratic group of individual leaders who form a community holding team, a team which can provide leadership and a central response for the whole independent organisation of local citizens. It's also an approach that they're suggesting which identifies community assets and enterprise solutions to enhance and develop the local community's response. The community organisers are hosted now by existing community organisations for their training year. The community organisations that are coming forward, initially there was a group of what were called Kickstarters, 11 of them, who took groups of organisers for the first year. Those Kickstarters were arranged because they were members of Locality in one way or another, substantial organisations with a long history that had the opportunity to be able to act quickly and were willing and able to be flexible around the arrangements because they were trialling a new approach. The organisers, including myself, were recruited locally to a common job description. As a result of some machinations with revenue and customs, were employed rather than given a bursary, and many of them were employed nationally by Locality. So of the 47 in the first cohort, about 35 or so were employed nationally by Locality and then seconded to their local community organisation. After the single year of training, the organisers need to find their own resources. So when my contract with Locality concludes in September, I will be responsible to find resources beyond the programme, together with my colleagues in South London, and we will be accountable principally to the local community. Of course we're employed, and there are practical ways in which that requires us to be accountable to Locality, but in practice the way in which it's been set up is extremely sensitive to the need for us to practically be accountable downwards, so that the arm's length responsibility for Locality is very light touch. Senior organisers, such as myself, train and support volunteer organisers. So I'm working with a group of 4 or 5 different individuals who are now beginning to listen on their own behalf, who have helped us run house groups and beginning to now develop some projects. And the intention is that out of all the work over the 4 years, there will be a new and independent professional association for community organisers endowed by a final grant from government to establish and manage the standards and the approach of community organising across the country. So in other words, it's setting in motion this contract from the OCS, setting in motion a whole new way of handling, of dealing with the community and encouraging and supporting new ways of engaging in local grassroots politics. Just some background on the training itself. As I say, the cohorts come through at different stages of the 4 years. Each cohort's about 40 people, and we're placed in teams, and about 3 cohorts a year. So somewhere between 10 and 12 cohorts over the 10 years. Over the 4 years, I'm sorry. The training starts with a residential, now of 3.5 days, and that's a mixture of experiential learning and directed inputs. There's online tutor supervision during the practice itself as we're learning. So each month we get together in one of 4 groups. And that allows us to online share our experience and to contribute to each other's learning. There's a set of 7 OCN Open College Network modules which have been set up to award a certificate in the foundations of community organising. So far we've done 3. The next 4 have just arrived in my inbox, and these are practical tasks, and in some cases research elements, which allow us to learn more about the foundations of what community organising is about. And then on top of that, in the final 6 months, just starting, there's a choice of Go Deeper courses, courses which allow you to go deeper into one aspect or another of community organising, and I'm taking one around digital organising, which should be very interesting. The principal focus of the approach that Locality has been promoting is to focus on this methodology called Root Solution Listening Matters. It's been developed over 20 years by Regenerate, and that provides a very useful, valuable and comprehensive strategy for organising at the local level. It's a framework essentially for animating the community and creating autonomous action. People are encouraged not only to listen to each other, but to begin to determine what it is that really stands out for them in their lives, what it is that really, where the pinch points are that make their life particularly difficult, and how they might take action if they acted together in new ways or in different ways that could potentially tackle some of those key questions, which might be about having a fun day so that neighbours can get to know neighbours, or it might be about tackling the local fly tipping, or it could be that the community's main focus is on issues that relate to local services. So it's a whole range of different ways in which such organising, by listening and talking to individuals, by helping them share with each other, and then by building their confidence, we're able to get to a point where they can take action together. So at the present time, as we are all the time, we're listening to citizens in a whole range of different places, door to door. That's been hard work in the cold and in the wet, but it's very rewarding because you just don't know who you're going to meet. In cafes, on the street, wherever citizens will be around, it's a great opportunity just to meet and talk, but talk with a purpose. And the conversation is recorded. The responses are logged, and the conversation leads to a point where we're encouraged to provoke the other to action. So encouraging people to think through what it is they might do, how they might be able to act as a result of the conversation, and where that might take them. And so one of the things they could do is to invite some of their neighbours to come and listen to each other. And those house groups are a really positive way in which local residents can begin to understand each other's needs and see something of a slightly bigger picture than perhaps they have in their own view. In bringing citizens together around their passion for change, we are ending up creating project groups, individual groups that want to go forward, to take forward a particular issue. Our great mantra, as I said earlier, is never to do for others what they can do for themselves. And so our role as project groups begin to emerge is essentially to step back, to support, to encourage, but not to dominate, to allow and help the group to seek out the action they want to take, and to be aware of the resources and ideas that they might be able to access. We're linking citizens up through listening to each other, and that in turn creates huge new networks. We've probably got about 600 different people that we've talked to over the last 2 or 3 months, 3 or 4 months. And that, of course, then your friends and your neighbours become potential customers for projects, potential volunteers, potential leaders, of course, and they become voters because one of the things that they're encouraged to think about is how they might use their vote in future, that they might even vote, because in many of these communities there's very little such voting going on. As I mentioned earlier, one of the key questions in terms of the relationship between organising and community development is this whole question of partnership. Organising essentially develops an independent citizen action. The autonomous action of people's organisations is central to the work of organising, and the choice to work with other agencies, with state agencies, with voluntary organisations, lies with and for the community to determine. We, of course, are approached by a whole range of local agencies to seek partnership and to share intelligence as we talk to lots and lots of residents. Of course, that's a very valuable resource. But that information is held confidentially, and it's held for the community. One of the great problems of community work over many years has been the fact that there's been a great deal of data extraction from communities. Information drawn out of the community and then handed over to people who don't actually have a real and living relationship with the people who've provided that data. And as a result, many of the decisions made are not very appropriate to the community's needs. People's organisations often find it best to remain distinct without formal allies, to make allies only around specific issues or particular concerns, rather than to be in partnership in any ongoing way. And as a result, they can remain an authentic and distinct voice for their community. The difference with community development, I think we've already covered. So I've run well into time. I hope that's helped to explain some of the current situation as well as the background and history. Here are just some questions which struck me as possible ones that we might want to explore. But if you have other questions, let's hear what you say and think, and let's have some exchange. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. You'll be pleased to hear that you've provoked quite a lot of discussion and questions from people. So let's try and work through a few of these. Starting off with Scott, who asked if there have been any early indication of success stories as part of the community organising programme, and I think he's particularly interested in any stories from outside London, if you've heard of any.
Very happy to contribute. I really think, Scott, it's very early days. There are successes, but 6 months into a process such as this is not a time to begin to pull the plant up to look at its roots. I think there's a sense in which this is a long-term process. This isn't something that produces fruit in even 2 or 3 years. As citizens begin to come together, begin to trust each other, begin to form these public relationships, so it begins to be possible for them to think about taking things on that are bigger and more extensive, that cover a wider area, that address bigger issues. In my own context, the great success that we've had is that a few front doors have been painted. That sounds like a damp squib, but the reality is it's a major step for that community to begin to know each other, to begin to do that together, and to begin to see a difference in their own environment that makes their very drab and dreary environment much, much brighter. So I don't have stories that I could pull off the shelf from across the country, partly because it's too early in the day, and partly because probably they are small scale and local at the moment. And if they do begin to be ones worth telling, Locality and others will no doubt want to tell them.
Next up, Penny asks whether the Chartists, Labour and Trade Union Movement, WEA, also form part of the UK history of community organising.
Thanks. There is no doubt a great deal of there's a common heritage for all progressive movements, and I would want to add the fact that the suffragette movement and a whole range of others over the last few centuries. But in terms of community organising per se, I think most people would trace it back to that particular period in the States, and so therefore its history arises out of those roots rather than necessarily out of the UK roots. Certainly, Citizens UK draws its inspiration from Alinsky and from the Industrial Areas Foundation, and is rightly quite closely allied to their approach and style, and that in turn, of course, is more foundationally Alinsky than any other. I think, however, you're absolutely right to point out that organising has roots that stretch out beyond the immediate, but in the UK it's come across from the States, certainly.
Scott has just responded to your previous answer, so I'll jump him ahead of the queue. He said, the trouble with your answer for me, Mark, is that for those of us doing this type of thing outside of the national projects, how do we relate to it and use it to inspire our own work right now?
Right. Well, I would. There's some of the inspiration is on the screen at the moment. I think there's a great deal to learn from the American examples, and over the next year, certainly, and probably 2 years, there will be a great deal coming out of Locality and elsewhere, telling the stories of what's been happening. At the moment, we're as an organiser group, we're in constant touch through some social media software. And those are allowing us to record some of our stories, the instances and experiences that we have, and those in turn are turning into will be turned into some publications, I believe, by Locality in due time, just telling the story of what it's like to be a community organiser on a day-to-day basis. I think that the inspiration is something that we certainly need and want to encourage. There are very few sources for UK organising at the moment in writing, and that's part of the reason why I think it's really important to go on talking about it, sharing it, and let more people know about the potential of what organising brings.
A couple of similar points from Sam and Scott. Sam said, as I understand it, Alinsky's approach was based on positive things arising from conflict. Sometimes when this is applied in community settings, it can yield results. It can also be very destructive. What is your experience of using conflict? Do you agree that sometimes it can be counterproductive and that consensus-based approaches are often more effective? And Scott followed on from that, saying, my experience of community organising is that it can be very damaging for you or your organisation when you start to gain traction, as some in power can feel very threatened and would rather respond with aggression to undermine the community and create division.
Yes, I think the role of conflict is often a sticking point, particularly I think in the British mind. It's interesting that the Americans don't seem to find that nearly as difficult. I think when we are looking to develop an independent source of power for the people, then there is a real sense in which that independence is in itself something of a threat to the current status quo. Many in powerful positions want to retain their power, to keep the status quo much as it is, and may allow small changes that relieve some pressure on them, but don't really want to give up the basics. When the people organise themselves in a way which is coherent, disciplined, and sustained, then there's a real sense in which they're asking fairly deep questions of that status quo. And it is no surprise that the powerful hit back, and they hit back because they have a lot of power. That may be through the press, that may be through the use of force, and it may be, of course, through reputational attack. All of those are used in situations in the UK and in the States. The reality is that it's a real test of how deeply organised the people are. What many in organising argue is that you start by choosing targets which are relatively easy and small scale, and over which you can have a fairly good chance of winning. You move on from there to another that is relatively simple and for which you have a likelihood of winning, and another, and another. Your choice of your early targets is really important because it gives people a real sense of confidence that they can achieve change. Clearly, as the organisation grows and as it faces bigger and bigger hurdles, as it chooses to take on more and more capacity and to be more and more demanding, so it tends to be that the powers that be become more aggressive. And there's no doubt that in a conflicted situation, the people's organisation has to be very robust. At the same time, there are many instances, examples such as the Olympic Park come to mind, where partnership is the chosen option. Telco, the East London Community Organisation, negotiated with the Olympic authorities a number of concessions around the Olympic Park. That, for example, the living wage would be paid to every employee who worked on the site, and that meant, of course, policing that for all the contractors and subcontractors across a wide and really diverse range of different settings. They negotiated the examination of the possibility of establishing a community trust for the new Olympic Village when it becomes local housing. These concessions and a number of others were won through the negotiation between the people's power and those who had the authority to make those decisions. It doesn't necessitate a conflicted position, but it does require the people to have power enough to bring people to account, to hold to account those who make public pledges. So there's a real sense in which at public assemblies, which London citizens hold on a regular basis, Telco holds in East London on a regular basis, the Olympic authorities have been brought up in public, as in person, and asked to have a conversation and to make public pledges in terms of their support for, or otherwise, the claims of the local community. It's a powerful mechanism to bring change, and can be conflictual. Of course, it can be quite strongly worded. But on the other hand, it can be one that's about partnership and development of a long-term relationship, which is the route that a number of the London Citizens campaigns have gone down, not least with the living wage.
The questions keep flooding in, so I think we might need some short and snappy answers from now on, if that's okay, Mark. So the next ones are the next ones are around online campaigns such as 38 Degrees. So Andy asks, it seems that they are effective in getting large numbers of people to support a cause while sat at their PC, but it lacks the face-to-face contacts. But it seems to meet some aspects of the definition of community organising. National politicians seem to be starting to take notice of what large numbers of their electors want and express in emails. Any responses to this saying that what's missing from 38 Degrees is those people being in touch with each other, face-to-face and other kinds of online activities such as Facebook and Twitter provide the opportunity to have multi-directional conversations. So Mark, what do you think about kind of online community organising?
Okay, funnily enough, that's my next project, or that's where I'm headed. A couple of bits of work I'm doing at the moment are about digital organising. So I'll watch this space is one answer to that. The other is that 38 Degrees and others who've done some very brilliant work on making online campaigning work are all about petitions and mobilising people around a particular cause. And organising is about a whole community coming together and building their organisation through taking actions to build their organisation. And it's that dynamic of building the organisation by taking actions to build their organisation that we need to hold as central to community organising. And at the moment, I don't see a community building around 38 Degrees, of course, a staff team and so forth. But in terms of the mass numbers, it's about potentially clicktivism, a sense of clicking on a button to show your consent to something without necessarily delivering on at any larger level. A public relationship between individuals is needed to deliver on community organising, in my view.
Another comment
Short
from...
enough for you, Tim?
Yes, that's great, Mark, thanks. The next comment is from Scott saying, the UK model seems a little imposed and artificial. How will it connect with existing community work and start to embed the idea in education so that we can really build a movement and avoid the project-based approach that can be here today and gone tomorrow? The objective must surely be to rebuild what community means to people and to give them the chance to participate in dialogues from which sustainable solutions will arise.
Yeah, I think my comments on partnership and so forth touch on that. I think the current situation in Locality's strategy is to establish a network of trained and competent community organisers. And it's from that practice that all the subsequent successes that are being suggested may well come. I think it's not fundamentally about making links between community organising and everything else that's happening. It's about community organising creating its own space and doing its own thing well, developing that independent place before engaging with the education system or indeed other community related work.
Great. Next up is Penny and Scott both commented that the model you described of community organising or the programme sounds brilliant, being employed and funded but not having to respond to national government agenda. But Penny asks what happens if government doesn't like the outcomes, and Scott added to this, national government isn't the only problem. What about local government too, if we find this threatening? And should we be prepared to follow the Alinsky model and promote more direct action?
In terms of the response of national government, I think it'll be very interesting to see. Given the fact that this is a 4-year programme and it only runs to the end of this period of this administration's tenure, I think there's a question about what happens next. Of course, this government's attitude and approach to organising has the imprimatur of the Prime Minister. He's been right behind this from the outset, and I think it's very difficult for him to step back from that. But the question really remains as to whether there will be life in it for the longer term. In terms of response of local government, I think that's a much more questionable issue. I think the response that local government makes to this is going to be very varied. Of course, what I enjoy about community organising is that, of course, it's very left-wing and it's very right-wing. It's not something which has a political colour, and as a result can be equally as offensive, difficult and conflictual with Labour authorities and with Conservative authorities, and of course Liberal Democrat authorities where they exist. So I think there's a real sense in which we're working in territory which is new, and the whole question of whether this is actually implemented to stir up the culture of local government is something yet to be seen. I'm not sure yet whether this and other means that government are using through localism and other mechanisms will truly unlock some of the of a new sort of relationship between local citizens and their government.
There are two similar points from Scott and Andy asking at what point do we know what the community is? Is there a danger of people with loud voices taking over and bullying the process and having, I guess, their demands met? So it's kind of about reconciling the different demands in community and particularly kind of recognising the role of positive action to include the marginalised. Sorry about that.
Well articulated, Tim. I think my sense is that there's that strong opinions, strong views are in every community, and that the reality is that common good often arises out of the exchange of those strong views. If you don't have strong views, you have no passion, and the passion will never, therefore, arise and deliver on real change. The possibility of strong voices winning over the meek and mild, or of indeed marginalised voices being shut out, is of course possible. But the evidence on the ground of Citizens UK is that the courses they've picked up have been those that have been for those at the very bottom of the system. My exposure to London Citizens has helped me see how much our cleaning staff and our catering staff are completely ignored by our system, and very often I have in the past just walked past them as though they didn't exist. Now, through that raising of my consciousness, I've become much more aware that actually that those at the base of our society are doing some very fundamental tasks, and we need to value them and give them a full voice in the way in which our society is run. So I think the evidence is that that doesn't happen. There is, of course, a danger, and any organiser worth their salt knows that's a potential problem.
Great. There's a question from Kate Bunting. She says, we at the Papworth Trust, disability charity working in the east of England, are looking for ways for people who use our services to work together to address local issues as part of our influencing activity. It sounds like this is something community organising could be effective with. Do you agree, and how could we get this started?
I think the problem around using community organising to mobilise people is that it cuts a cord back to the roots of community in a locality. Many people, one of the critiques of community organising is around the fact that it tends to be about bridging between communities of interest or concern or identity, rather than about organising within those. There are some organising examples in the States where interest groups have become the focus, but identity groups, like people with disabilities, it's really hard to enable this to work effectively when people are so dispersed. The face-to-face, one-to-one relationships which are needed is fundamental to the way in which organising occurs. I'm sure it might be possible to use some such methods, but I'm not clear in my own mind how that might work. I'd be very pleased to have some correspondence and talk that through outside this context.
Okay, great. There are a couple more comments in the chat section, but I guess we're coming towards the end of our time. So sorry if we didn't get round to your comment, but a few people have answered a few for you, I think. So should we wrap it up now?
I think so. Okay. Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you. A big thank you to Mark for that very thorough overview of community organising and a chance to really engage with this hot topic. It's been great to see the amount of questions and interactions we've had today. It's really been one of the most dynamic sessions we've had so far. So just to remind, it's part of the Creative Council's support series. We will be hosting further ones, so stay tuned on the website and you'll see what they come up. We're probably going to keep them on Friday afternoons. So stay tuned and see what we've got planned. The Creative Council's, this round of Creative Councils finishes the end of April, but undoubtedly Involve and NESTA will continue to do similar programs in the future. So thank you for taking time to listen into this, and if you have any comments or questions about this work and what we do, we're always willing to hear your feedback. Have a good Friday and a good weekend. Thank you.